Hi everyone, it's Alexis with Project Management Made Simple. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you all some developer anti-patterns in Scrum. So if you want to hear more, then keep watching and let's get started. The role of the developers is pretty straightforward. It's to develop the product. It's to build whatever it is that you're building or whatever service that you are providing. And so with that, they work closely with the product owner to understand the scope of what it is that they are to build, as well as working with the Scrum Master to adapt, to inspect and adapt their Scrum process in order to enable them to be the best and most effective team that they can be. With being a developer, there are some anti-patterns that I have witnessed myself as a Scrum Master that I thought to share with you all that hopefully developers can address, can first identify if this is the case for their team and address these issues if they arise. So the first anti-pattern that I've witnessed has been a team breaking their definition of done. Now, the definition of done is an agreement for the team that states for each deliverable the set of criteria that it needs to pass in order to consider that deliverable done or completed. And so where I've seen this happen is with Scrum teams, when we get towards the end of the sprint and we're doing our sprint review and the team is inspecting what's completed and they come to some deliverable that hasn't been completed and they decide that they want to claim partial work to that and then split and put the remainder of the work either in the backlog or put it into the next sprint. The issue with this is that now we have work inconsistently meeting that definition of done. And that definition of done really speaks to the quality of our deliverables. It enables us to build quality into each one of our deliverables rather than having quality split out from it. And so once we start breaking things down and splitting out work such that it doesn't consistently meet this definition of done, then we are compromising the quality of those items being completed. Another anti-pattern is either having low or no participation in the daily scrum. The daily scrum is meant to be a bite-sized planning session wherein the team can track towards seeing how feasible it is for them to still achieve their sprint goal. They take a look at what was completed the previous day and what they plan to complete today and any impediments to their success. And so it's important, it's crucial that the team that is actually doing the work, the developers who are doing the work, be a part of this daily scrum. I have witnessed it, however, where sometimes team members don't show up, they maybe don't see it as important, or if they do show up, they give a very minimal contribution. And so this becomes a conversation to be had with the team and perhaps with the individual in terms of perhaps why this is happening. Now, I'll say this along with all of the anti-patterns this goes for. When these kinds of things are happening, these are things that you do want to inspect further to understand why they're happening and to decide from there if there's more coaching that you need to give to the team or if there's some other thing, some other impediment that needs to be tackled to erase and get rid of these anti-patterns. The next anti-pattern is having a team that exceeds their planned capacity during sprint planning. So during sprint planning, one of the things that we do is we get together to understand what the team's capacity is for that given sprint. Team members may have planned vacation time, they may have other activities that are going to take away from their capacity, such as training or whatever else is happening within the organization. And so within sprint planning, we want to take the opportunity to talk about capacity. Now, when we talk about capacity, that gives us an understanding of the available time the team has dedicated to their work, to dedicate to work that has been planned into the sprint. Now, the assumption here is that we have all of that work estimated, however you choose to estimate, story points, hours, whatever the case may be. And so when we go through the rest of sprint planning, we want to align the work that we have planned with our capacity. And so when we have teams that are overpromising, that are exceeding their capacity at the very start, this is an issue because hopefully this is obvious, they're likely to fail. Now, I will note that there are some instances in which a team perhaps is able to do more than their capacity, but that's not not where, and that becomes another conversation, but that's not where we want to start. Our foundation, our baseline of where we want to start is to match the amount of work with our capacity instead of exceeding it, so that we are not overpromising and the product owner and the team is not put in a position where they now have to explain to their stakeholders afterwards why the work that was forecasted is not completed. Now, this also does not mean that the team is always going to complete the work within the sprint just because it meets their capacity. But what it does do is help to manage those expectations with stakeholders, wherein if we know from the very beginning that it's not feasible, it's not likely that we're going to complete a deliverable, that's a conversation we can have preemptively rather than reactively at the end of the sprint. The next anti-pattern is bringing changes into the sprint that endanger the sprint goal. As a part of sprint planning, the product owner sets the sprint goal for the team. And that is where the team wants to focus their time and attention towards completing. And so, of course, there are things that are still happening in the background of the team. So even though they have their deliverables that they're working on, there's still the wider organization at hand that may have demands and changes that they need to have the team to incorporate. Now, I could do a whole video dedicated to how to do change management. And actually, I do have videos on change management and scope creep, and I'll have those linked below if you're interested. But in this particular symptom that I've seen, what happens here is when the team brings changes into the sprint that endangers the sprint goal, then we don't meet the sprint goal. And like I said on the previous point, now we have to go back and have conversations with stakeholders about why certain things weren't completed. Now, I will say, you know, there's exceptions potentially to every rule. And let's say, for instance, we have some big production support issue. Well, in general, rule of thumb in IT, production support is number one. So if that is something that is impacting enough and it is going to endanger the sprint goal, that is something that is going to have to be, you know, considered. But I'm talking about things that perhaps are not critical, and there's changes that are constantly coming in, and there's not a person who is managing those. Now, we know this should be the product owner who's having kind of that first say of what changes are to be considered, but then ultimately it's on the developers to push back and say, hey, we're in a sprint right now, and have that conversation with the product owner around potential changes that they're trying to bring in that would endanger the sprint goal and the implications of doing so. And finally, another anti-pattern to share is the team not having backlog refinement. So backlog refinement, backlog grooming, requirements clarifications, pretty much all the same thing, is an opportunity for the team to get together, to talk about deliverables, and have a better understanding of what the requirement is, what the acceptance criteria is, who the user persona is, and really just get into the details so that when the team picks up that work in their sprint, they can take that deliverable and they can run with it without having to constantly stop and talk to a stakeholder, talk to a product owner. Now, it's not that we don't want them to talk to each other. That's actually a value of Agile, is having constant customer interaction, but it's really more so speaking to this flow piece, wherein when we're picking up, the developers are picking up a deliverable, they want to have as much of the information as they need so that they can take it and they can just move forward. Now, of course, there does need to be those validation points that we're checking that we're on the right path, but if it's so lean, the developer cannot even start the work, well then now we're going to have piling work in progress. We're going to have a lot of work that's incomplete, and we're going to have longer lead times and cycle times perhaps when it comes to actually completing our work. So it's important that the team does regular backlog refinement so that they can have a healthy backlog, and also once they get to sprint planning, it makes this process a lot easier because they know that the items at the top of the backlog have already been refined, and they can pull those items into the sprint as they are planning for it. And so I want to thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please do give this video a thumbs up. Leave any questions or comments below, and I will talk to you all in my next video.